Mastering modal verbs: should, ought to, and had better. Hello, language learners. In today's video, we're diving deep into the world of modal verbs. Specifically, we'll focus on should, ought to, and had better. These modal verbs are all used to give advice, but they vary in terms of formality and tone. Understanding these nuances will help you communicate more effectively and naturally in English. Before we dive into our three main modal verbs, let's quickly define what a modal verb is. Modal verbs are a special type of verb that we use to express things like possibility, obligation, and necessity. In this video, we're focusing on how they are used to offer advice. The first modal verb we're looking at is should. Should is used in both informal and formal situations. This makes it very versatile. When you use should, it typically communicates advice, recommendations, or obligations. Here's an example. You should study before the test. The next modal verb is ought to. Ought to is a bit more formal than should, and is less commonly used in everyday spoken English. However, you'll often encounter it in written English, particularly in formal or academic contexts. Here's an example. Students ought to read the assigned materials before the seminar. Our final modal verb for today is had better. Had better is used to give advice that carries a warning or suggests that there may be negative consequences if the advice isn't followed. It can come off as more forceful, so it's typically used in less formal or more urgent situations. For example, you had better leave now, or you'll miss your train. Now, let's summarize the formality levels of these three modal verbs. Should is the most versatile, used in both formal and informal contexts. Ought to is more formal and less common in spoken English. Lastly, had better has a less formal tone and often carries a sense of urgency or warning. That wraps up our discussion on the modal verbs should, ought to, and had better. Now you should have a better understanding of how these verbs are used to give advice and how their tone can change based on the context. Keep practicing, and you'll master these in no time. Until next time, happy learning!